I feel like we will have some more folks join us, but let's go ahead and get started with our exciting conversation today. My name is TJ. I'm the Director of Partnerships at the Elections Group. I am joining you from this fabulous nondescript Starbucks as a result of some travel issues. But for anybody who's joining us for the first time, we do not normally do these from Starbucks. And the Elections Group is a team of election experts supporting election professionals through collaboration, thought leadership, and elevating best practices. We've all worked in election offices, so we know firsthand the challenges faced by election officials, and we use our real world experience to help you solve those challenges. Today, we are very excited to be hosting the second webinar in a webinar series that we're doing in partnership with the Center for Election Innovation and Research, as well as Arizona State University's Mechanics of Democracy Laboratory. Before I drone on any further, I'm going to throw it to Kyle.
Yeah, thanks, DJ. Hi, everybody. I'm Kyle Yoder. I'm the Associate Research Director at the Center for Election Innovation and Research. For those of you who don't know us, CEIR is a nonpartisan nonprofit that works with state and local election officials around the country and on both sides of the aisle. Our research supports election officials with practical analysis about election administration and informs the public about how elections work in order to increase confidence in our system. We are also excited to be partnering with the Elections Group and ASU's Mechanics of Democracy Lab on this year's Books and Ballots series. This year, the series is showcasing the most useful research for election officials from June's Election Science, Reform, and Administration Conference, or ESRA, which was hosted at Florida State University in Tallahassee. Today, we're talking about recruitment and retention of poll workers, specifically research on understanding poll workers' motivations and beliefs. We're thrilled to have a full expert panel today, including Professors Anita Manion and David Kimball of the University of Missouri St. Louis, Professor Matt Lamb of Texas Tech University, and Mike Hanmer of the University of Maryland. Each of these esteemed experts is going to present a handful of slides on their research into poll workers' motivations and beliefs before TJ and I moderate a short discussion between them. But we know that today's topic is going to generate a lot of questions, so we plan to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Please go ahead at any time, drop your questions into the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and get to them, as many of them as we can before we end. So my turn to drone on and on is over. So without further ado, I will turn things over now to Professor Anita Manion to tell us about her research with David Kimball on voices from the front lines. And Anita, I will let you vamp while I share the slides.
Well, thank you all for being here today and for inviting us to share our research. Kyle's pulling up slides now. David Kimball and I can, with the help of academics and election officials from across the country, surveyed poll workers in December of 2024. Next slide, please. And so these are the jurisdictions who participated in our poll worker survey. If you're not on here and you're an academic or election official, please let us know if you'd like to participate in the future. We'd love to have you. But you can see we did have diversity by state and also by ideology. So you can see Lubbock, Texas had nearly 70% Trump vote share in 2024, where Charlottesville, Virginia had only about 15%. So we have a good spread here. And in total, we surveyed over 2,200 poll workers. Next slide, please. So one of our findings was that poll workers are very confident that the votes in their jurisdiction are being counted correctly. 99% were very or somewhat confident of that. As compared to the LEO survey that Paul Gronke and Paul Manson administer out of Reed College, they found that when local election officials were asked about their confidence in the vote count in their state, about 95% were confident. And David and I also conducted a nationally representative sample through the CES survey and asked voters how confident they were, and 69% were very or somewhat confident. So overall, poll workers are more confident than the other constituents that votes are being counted accurately. They believe in the work they're doing. And we found out that men, older poll workers who know other voters at their location, Democrats, and white poll workers had higher levels of confidence than other poll workers. However, we saw no difference in voter confidence across the jurisdictions in our sample. Next slide, please. We also wanted to reflect on what were the experience of poll workers in the November 2024 election. When we asked about, were poll workers punctual, knowledgeable, did they work as a team, and were they professional? 96% or more agreed with those statements. When it came to problems they encountered, very few reported problems such as with voting equipment, checking in with ID, completing provisional ballots. The biggest problem they identified was voters waiting more than an hour to vote. And so we did ask overall, does your experience in 2024 make you more likely to serve in the future? And 58% said yes, it did. And only 5% said their experience in 2024 made them less likely. So this is a very brief overview of the work we've done. We are going to drop a survey in the chat. We'd love to know if there's questions you'd like to have on a future poll worker survey, or if you would like to participate. But I will keep my comments short here and talk to you more in the Q&A and discussion.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Anita, we are going to turn now to Professor Matt Lamb from Texas Tech University.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invite. Today, I'm actually going to be talking about, well, actually the same survey that David and Anita administered last year, except I'm going to be talking about an embedded experiment that I and my colleague Stephen Perry actually put into the survey. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what informed that experiment and our findings. So next slide, please, Kyle. So poll workers do a lot, right? There's a lot of research out there about the effects of election laws, election policies. However, who actually has to implement those laws? To a large degree, the poll workers, and they actually have considerable discretion in terms of how check-in procedures go, sometimes who has to fill out a provisional ballot, etc. Now, these poll workers have two distinct responsibilities. They have a responsibility to their constituents to facilitate their right to cast a ballot, right? And they usually want to make the process as easy, as convenient, and as open as possible. So for the purpose of this paper, I just sort of call that the greeter, notion of poll workers. Now, at the same time, this isn't like a typical customer service job where you can sometimes let policies slide, right? Oh, I'm not supposed to technically let you return that item, but I'll do it this time. No, you have laws and rules to uphold because the integrity of the election is also important. So this is what I call sort of the guardian or the guard notion of poll workers, protectors that ensure the integrity of the election. So there are these dual responsibilities that poll workers have. Now, as Anita said, and part of the research from this survey and from previous surveys is that poll workers have a lot of motivations. They have a lot of different reasons for why they're poll workers. What I was interested in is how do they view their role as a poll worker? And do they consider these things, one of these ideas, these notions of being a poll worker, more important than the other? Next slide, please. Okay, so same demographics as the survey that Anita told you before, so I won't go over them again. 8 jurisdictions, nationally represented, or not nationally representative, but they're diverse in terms of their political affiliation, geography. Next slide, please. Okay, so the way the experiment worked was I randomly assigned respondents into 3 groups. One in which the survey just had text, no image. That's, the treatment on the left. In a second group, they were shown a picture. They were primed with a photo of a Caucasian female voter casting a ballot. And then the third group was shown a picture that I attempted to make as identical as possible to that first photo, except instead this is an African-American voter casting her ballot. They were then asked, which do you think is the most important responsibility of a poll worker, facilitating the voter's right to cast a ballot or ensuring that only eligible voters cast a ballot? So the idea here was not only to see which do they think is more important, but can their answers be influenced by priming them with voters of various demographics? So let me talk about what I found here. Next slide, please. So this is just the overall responses. Over 2/3 of respondents said facilitating the voter's right to cast a ballot is the most important thing. That's not too surprising. I've been in a lot of poll worker trainings. They really hammer this point home. So next slide, please. That being said, certain demographics were more likely to answer one way than another. Instead of walking through every chart here, I will just say that by and large, male respondents were actually more likely to say that the right to vote was more important than female respondents. African Americans were actually less likely to say that facilitating the right to vote was more important than white poll workers. Age, the older you got, the more you thought that facilitating the right to vote was most important. Younger poll workers thought that ensuring integrity of the election was most important. And not too surprisingly, Republicans were way more likely than Democrats to say that ensuring the integrity of the election was most important. Next slide, please. Now, what was the result of the experiment? By and large, there were not much, no results. The photos themselves, being primed by an image of the voter, didn't really seem to make much of a difference in terms of how poll workers responded. Right? So next slide, please. So the overall takeaways here, poll workers are overwhelmingly likely to view themselves as facilitators of the right to vote, as opposed to this guardian notion. The demographics of the voter had no effect on how poll workers viewed their roles, but the demographics and characteristics of the poll workers did seem to have an effect on how they viewed their roles. And we can get into a deeper discussion of that later on. Hope you found this interesting, and I'm happy to discuss this further later. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Matt. And just to round us out for the presentations, Mike Hanmer from the University of Maryland, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much. So this work is motivated by the threats and the protests that put election workers in the spotlight and led to really serious concerns about additional threats leading up to the 2024 elections. And I want to note that this is co-authored with Isaiah Espinoza, who is one of our great PhD students and also a Marine veteran. Next slide, please. We focus on veterans for a few reasons. First, there have been successful efforts led by the nonprofit group We the Veterans and Military Families to recruit veterans and their families to serve in the election workforce, primarily as poll workers, but also in other jobs. And they've done a really great job recruiting over 100,000 people. They formed important partnerships with major organizations such as the NFL and the NBA. And we worked with them to design a survey experiment to test whether recruiting veterans and their family members would boost trust in elections. And there's good reasons from the literature, primarily in sociology, that shows the public has positive views of veterans. And so we think they're a particularly interesting group to study in this context because they're associated with service, competency, commitment, and safety, some of the things that are really at risk here in terms of thinking about trust in elections. Next slide, please. So we tested these messages about recruiting veterans and their family members, being from the local community versus somebody from the local community where we didn't make any reference to their current or former job or role. And so we randomly assigned people to read about a veteran or just somebody else from the local community. And we got really strong results. One of the key results is that information about recruiting veterans led to a 7 percentage point increase in feeling confident that votes would be counted as intended. And we got even bigger effects, the largest effects, among people who are most skeptical of elections. And we measure that in a couple of different ways that I can talk about in the Q&A. We think that's particularly important because that's the group we're most concerned about in terms of thinking about threats or harassment or actual potential violence. And we got these results or similar results across a broad range of outcomes, whether it was belief and fairness in the process, fairness in the outcome, security for hacking, or approval of the local election official who was doing the recruitment. And we also saw a decrease in concerns about fraud and threats of violence when people read that there would be recruitment efforts to bring veterans and their family members into the workforce. Next slide. So we focus on 3 key implications here. The first one is that we encourage election officials to recruit veterans and their family members to elections jobs and to publicize it when they do so. So that's something that if you're not already doing, you could be doing. Another thing is to ask your current staff, whether it's permanent staff or your surge staff, if they're veterans or their military family members. And based on the demographics of those groups, we have good reason to believe that there'll be a number of people who would fit that. And that's, again, something that can be publicized and doesn't necessarily require new recruitment efforts, but just sort of sharing information about what the current workforce looks like. And then this last recommendation is really one that came from Isaiah and his experience when he transitioned from military service. We really would like to see in the longer term the military officials and election officials partnering to promote elections jobs as part of the process of transitioning out of the military. We think that the public service pitch plus the wide variety of knowledge and skills that you need in elections jobs would be particularly appealing. And again, our results show that there's also these positive effects on trust in elections. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Mike. That's awesome. Kyle, I'm going to take the first question, if that's okay with you, because I'm thinking about Matt's research in particular, and Matt, but really for everybody. So if you got an answer, throw it at us. If I'm a local election official, you guys have done this research, you've got your learnings. How do I make an action plan based on this? What does it look like? Is it differentiating my recruitment strategies? How do I make sure I can take advantage of these learnings? Looking at Matt first, but happy to get in.
First of all, don't expect me to solve any kind of big recruitment crisis. I'm just offering suggestions here. But by and large, some of the research that I've done shows that most poll workers are recruited by other poll workers, right? It's word of mouth. Well, actually, most poll workers are just asked again by their local elections officials, right? They're just tapped on the shoulder, hey, you served in 2022, do you want to come back for 2024, right? The second largest or second biggest way is that they are asked by people that they know who are already poll workers, right? Hey, David, are you looking to earn some extra cash this fall, right? And that's well and good, except like-minded people tend to hang out with each other, right? So if I'm a poll worker that thinks one way, I'm probably going to ask poll workers that also are in my social circle, and birds of a feather tend to flock together. So in terms of and I should also mention that sort of along these same lines, younger people, younger poll workers were more likely to have been recruited via marketing, media, postings and all that. Older folks were more likely to be asked or personally recruited. African Americans, regardless of age, were more likely to be personally recruited. So I think that one of the things you mentioned, diversifying your recruitment plan. The one thing, and I realize this is very general, very abstract, is trying to tap into communities that you typically don't get poll workers from, right? Whatever that looks like in your community, and recruitment strategies are usually best tailored to specific communities anyway. I don't think there's really a one size fits all situation here. So, by and large, I understand why a lot of elections officials will just want to recruit the same people over again. You're getting a good crop of people, right? If you've worked with them before. But trying to go after, I'm not even going to say younger people, right? Just given the age issues, I'm going to say trying to tap into communities that you typically don't tap into, would be a big first step into diversifying your poll worker workforce, if that is a goal for you. So I'll turn it over to whatever other people might have to say on this.
Mike, is there anything there vis-a-vis the veteran community? Like, in terms of how they're recruited, or maybe not?
Yeah, so I mean, I would just put in a plug for We the Veterans and Military Family Members, and I don't want to jump ahead on the Q&A, but it's relevant because somebody also asked a question about, we know that there are issues of poll watchers, and some of them do come from military backgrounds, and We the Veterans and Military Families got started because they were concerned about the mis and disinformation that was coming from their Facebook page, from their friends, from their community. And so they have another big part of their mission is to, bring people together so that we're on the same page about what is true and what is not. And so they are actively working on mis and disinformation as well.
Anita and David, I want to give you a chance to jump in here as well, because I know a whole slide deck you didn't get to show us this morning that also went into some more detail on who the poll workers, like that were responding to your survey, who they were, what their characteristics as a population were. Can you tell us a little bit about those characteristics of your survey sample, and what election officials who are listening to this and wondering, who can I reach out to in my community can use, how they can use that information?
Absolutely. Our findings for our sample were similar to other studies' findings on demographics. Our respondents were about 61% female. About almost 75% were over 60 years old, and only 3% were 18 to 25. So sort of our college age students, another 5%, 26 to 40. So in this recruitment question, I think there's two ways of thinking of it. Like, do you continue going after the older folks because that is your bread and butter, right? But also, can you pair that with recruitment of maybe high school and college students? I know we have worked with the election officials in St. Louis City and County to try to recruit college students as well as high school students to be poll workers. Sometimes they can help with that technology. The St. Louis County has a wait time app now, so helping with a lot of that. Demographically, as far as race, about 76% were white, non-Hispanic, 10% Black, 6% Hispanic, and 1% Asian. 44% Democrats and 31% Republicans. That is also a challenge we have here in St. Louis, and in Missouri's large jurisdictions where we have to have paired Republican and Democrats. So if you're in a St. Louis City, which is largely Democratic, then they're trying to figure out how to recruit Republicans and vice versa. And then when it came to experience, 75% of our sample had worked 2 or more elections, and only 14% were working their first election.
I'll just add real quick, with the poll worker survey, we also asked how they heard about becoming a poll worker, how they were recruited. Very few, less than 5%, said they were recruited by a political party, to address one of the questions in the chat. And the most common response, as Matt said, was a friend or a neighbor, somebody I know told me about it. And as Anita mentioned, most of the poll workers had worked at least 2 elections prior to 2024. So I think obviously a big recruiting tool is going back to the people that worked the last time. So, yeah.
Mike, I'm going to look at you for we're thinking about veterans, or your research is thinking about veterans. Are there other groups of folks that you can look to whose presence perhaps would be trust improving, or is the veteran community singular in that way? And have you done any of that pre-research?
So that's a really good question. And one of the things that we thought about doing but didn't do at the time, mainly because we wanted to see, well, first of all, is there effect for veterans? And we just, given our resources, we could only test the one thing, but we're going to go back into the field and also look at other groups. So I know that lawyers and college students come up a lot in discussions, and I saw some of that in the Q&A too. We didn't do an experiment on those groups, but we took a look, and they did not seem as attractive to people in general as veterans. Again, nobody in our survey was saying that they had problems with lawyers or college students per se, but just when we asked them about how confident they would feel if they heard that, significant portions of the workforce were recruited from those groups. Veterans did stand out against them. But we also want to look at firefighters and nurses because they share similar characteristics in terms of service and in general trust in society. Again, I think veterans do provide something that's more unique beyond those groups, but we think that those groups might be another set of people who just knowing that they're around gives people a little bit more comfort with the process and trust that they're in good hands, so to speak. But we're about to go into the field. I have a meeting after this meeting about launching that survey. So hopefully we'll have news soon.
Folks joining the call don't know this, but Mike's coming to us straight from a dissertation defense and going straight to another meeting. So we're very lucky to have him squeeze us into his schedule. I wanted to follow up, Mike, kind of on this mechanism of trust, because is it really as simple as poll workers kind of announcing to the community that they are recruiting at their local legion to take an idea from the chat, or making some kind of press announcement about where they're trying to recruit poll workers for, or making this big public push? Or does it take something more? Like, do you need folks wearing stickers at the polling places or something like that?
No, that's a really good question. So just to provide a little bit more background on the study, we gave people something to read in the context of a survey that was designed to be a news clip. So it was pretty short. It was just 2 short paragraphs that described the individual and had a quote. The quote was basically the same, that they said, they wanted to protect the integrity of elections. So there was a little bit more than just, hey, we're recruiting this type of person versus a generic person. There was this statement, but the statement was common across both the veteran and the person who wasn't described in terms of their job. And so I think that, based on what I've seen and the way we modeled this was off of a lot of the stories that came out in newspapers about We the Veterans and their efforts. So we do know from other research that people do take seriously communications directly from election officials. One of the really good pieces of news, I think, out of this literature is that the most trusted source for information about elections are local election officials. That seems like that's the way it should be. And the public actually respond. And so I do think it's powerful when elected officials come out and provide that information.
I'm looking at the Q&A. Folks, please continue to put questions in there. I think we're soon reaching a point where we'll shift over to those. But I do want to turn to Anita and David with a question. I know that some of your research talked about or asked election workers about vote centers. Obviously, vote centers are a growing, or early voting, I think, is a form of vote centers, is a growing portion of how folks choose to vote. Can you just talk a little bit about how that might impact recruitment and retention of election workers?
Do you want me to start, David? Okay. So we asked that question on the poll worker survey, and then David and I have also surveyed voters in St. Louis County and also Fresno County, California, and have a paper out on that. And so we find that overwhelmingly poll workers and voters support the use of vote centers. They like being able to vote at any polling place in their county, and it means they're not getting turned away for going to the wrong polling place. That's huge. When we also published a paper where we really talked with our election officials in St. Louis County, and they gave us access to their staff, and we really understood their process and how they did this. And they were really thoughtful in how they implemented it from top to bottom. And it was very effective. And they were able to decrease their number of poll workers and also have financial savings by implementing vote centers. So overall, our findings on vote centers are very positive. We did ask a question on the poll worker survey about vote centers too for folks who have those. Along with early voting, all states in our sample allowed early voting. So that means that election officials are trying to fill these positions, not just on election day, but for multiple days preceding that. About a third of our poll workers that were surveyed worked multiple days in November 2024. I'll stop talking. David, did you have anything to add to that?
Just that I think the rapid expansion of early voting is a recruitment challenge for election officials because now you need you need to fill multiple days, not just one day. I mean, I think it's easier to recruit people say, hey, give up your election day for democracy. Now saying, okay, now I need you for the 10 days leading up to election day also, like that's a much harder sell. And so that's gonna, I think, lead to more retirees being poll workers, right? Because those are the folks that have the time to do it.
I agree. It seems to me that folks who are in the workforce or going to school, sometimes, your employer or your professor might say, hey, election day, we give you that time off, but not for the week or 2 weeks before the election.
Matt, you look like you wanted to jump in there. Yeah.
Just a small point. So a few years ago, I and a team did a survey of voters in Houston when they first implemented vote centers. But Harris County did this odd thing where they implemented vote centers, but also kept their localized precinct polling places. So we compared voter reported experiences at vote centers versus their precinct polling place. Now, in terms of their overall evaluations of vote centers, it was the same as what Anita said. They evaluated their experience at vote centers overall very highly. They liked their precinct polling places more, right? And one of the major reasons cited was they felt like the poll workers were friendlier at their precinct polling places. Now, I agree that vote centers have a lot of administrative benefits, right? But I do think that there are a lot of voters that really see the polling place, the act of voting, as they like a very localized community feel to the experience, right? And if there's one thing that could be said of a lot of voters is they tend to be pretty quick to sniff out when something is like not, oh, okay, this person's not necessarily where I'm from, or they don't look like they're from my neighborhood, etc. And that has been shown in previous research, not necessarily by me, but others, that can impact not only voter experience, but trust in the election. So there are pros and cons to every reform, obviously, to the extent that that's a con. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, agreed. And like where you cite the vote centers is very important as well. David and I are working on a paper on that now too. Does it affect turnout if people have to travel further to a vote center than they did their previous precinct polling place? And does that affect different populations differently?
TJ, I think we are running up on the time. We want to start opening it up to the Q&A, but while we still have the mic, just to give everybody one last chance to plug kind of what's next for them in this line of research, and any surprises or questions or things that you're looking forward to digging into with regards to poll worker recruitment and retention. We'll go the opposite order from the slide. So Mike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so definitely looking at testing the other groups and then trying to understand a little bit more about what it is about the particular individuals that we might mention. Is it their experience? Is it sort of their association with service? Is it their association with security? Because I think that could help also with the messaging that ultimately comes with the announcement. If you're making an announcement, hey, we're recruiting this group, saying a little bit more about why, or having them tee up a quote about why might just help reinforce those things. But not sure it's any one thing. It might be a whole bunch of things, but that would be useful to know as well.
Yeah. Oh, you're still muted. There.
You'd think after, 5 years of Zoom, I'd know how to unmute myself. Yeah, just a few projects coming up. I'm very interested in the relationship between, the sort of social aspect of elections, right? Does knowing a poll worker, does frequently interacting with poll workers increase your trust in the process? I mean, Anita kind of showed those stats that your typical poll worker tends to be a lot more trusting of election results than the voters. Could be just the type of person that's more trusting is also the type of person to be an election worker, right? So I think I think her results are highly suggestive that there is something to the process of learning how to be a poll worker. And in the aftermath of the election, unpleasantness after 2020, I know a major recruitment tool by election administrators was to tell people, if you're skeptical of the election results from last time, come on down and learn for yourself how we do things. I'm very interested in whether or not that's true. I have a few, or whether that panned out the way that they thought. So I have a few projects that are kind of in the planning stages now. So if any of you out there in the audience are interested, I'd like to, as Anita said, also work with y'all on potential future projects. So yeah, that's one of the major things with regard to poll workers that I'll be working on here in the next few months.
Who's gonna go?
Yeah, I think we're really interested in the fairly rapid growth in vote centers and early voting and what that does um, for poll worker recruitment and training. As I mentioned a little bit before, I mean, I think some of the election officials we've talked to, mostly here around St. Louis and in California, the attraction of vote centers is you have fewer polling places and therefore fewer poll workers, and so you could maybe call some of the deadwood and rehire like your best poll workers and focus on training them. I don't know, does it work out that way as planned, or what are the challenges in shifting to those newer models?
Yeah, and David and I are working on a pilot study to try to put together excuse me, a national database of jurisdictions with vote centers. And so again, if you are one of those folks, or if you're interested in learning more about those, you have questions and you want to connect with election officials who've implemented those, please feel free to reach out to us.
All right, Kyle, are we ready for the Q&A?
I think so. You want to go first?
I see one that I like, which I think about my own experience as a former election official, and we'd make these big posters and we'd put, come make $220 in a single day. And I'm wondering if anybody's research showed that compensation was a significant factor, or at least a significant enough factor that it deserves so much space on our flyers, suggesting or hearing perhaps not, but uh, maybe Matt, feel free to jump on that, or anybody else.
Sure. Previous research has shown that compensation is one of the key consistent, motivators, right? That's not the only motivator. There's no, and this is tough, because there's no singular motivator for poll workers. But pay does seem to be consistent across multiple studies, right? So that being said, I think it's conditional. I saw somebody in the chat bemoan trying to recruit college students for poll workers. That's something, I live in a college town. That's something I've had my own election administrator sort of complain about was, in theory, college students they're always complaining that they're broke, right? Why don't they have this opportunity? Why don't they take advantage of this opportunity to earn $200-300? Well, as much as they may like an extra $200 or $300, they dislike having to show up somewhere at 5 in the morning more. So and of course, there are logistical issues. You have, at least in Texas, you have to be registered in the county to vote where you're going to be a poll worker. By the time most college students are even thinking about the election, that deadline has already passed. So a big hindrance to college poll workers is that a lot of them are not registered in that actual county, and they instead elect to vote by mail or vote absentee from their home counties, etc. But this was all apropos of, yes, payment. Payment is a consistent motivator. It's not the only one, and it is often conditional.
Unless anybody has any other thoughts to add, I'll move on to another question that jumped out at me, which is, this is from a election official in Ohio, but I can also speak to having received similar training in the various states that I've been in a poll worker over the years, where when we train poll workers in a lot of places, they're trained to not think of themselves as the arbiters of who gets to vote. In some cases, places that may be the case, but in a lot of places, we're actively trying to foster that sense of that facilitator more so than that guardian when it comes to poll workers, at least, because there are others there who are tasked more with that guardian aspect. This question is asking if there are any concerns about that kind of an attitude in your recruiting for poll workers, but I'll broaden it and just ask any strategies for really trying to drive home that message. Any ideas for how to make sure that poll workers, not only the majority, but everyone feels that is a big part of their role. And I did the thing where I didn't direct it to somebody, but I see thoughts.
And I'll go first.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is where, really regimenting that training comes in handy, or really becomes important. One of the things that Anita's presentation noted is that people are quite confident in their local election results. One of the things that I've seen or strategies that I've used to sort of negate any of this guardian notion that people might have is, I've been in trainings where potential poll workers will say, well, what are they doing in Michigan? What are they doing in Pennsylvania? And the local election official says, I'm not in charge of elections in Michigan and Pennsylvania. I'm in charge of elections here, and I can tell you what we're doing, and you can feel confident in what we're doing, right? So part of that is just, poll workers by and large do tend to follow the instructions of their local elections officials because they trust their local elections officials, right? The more localized the official, the more trust there is in that person. So if elections officials can just start by really fostering that trust, not only with their poll worker pool, but with their community at large, I think that really gets at this issue that you're talking about. And of course, recruitment, in the first place, kind of also sort of mitigates that notion, making sure that you're recruiting people that are going to be fair-minded, are capable of the task at hand and all that. So it may sound simple, but just trust and, local elections officials fostering that trust is really key to that.
TJ, unless you're burning to go, I have a follow-up for the group on recruitment.
Kyle, I'm responding to one of these, so I got all tied up in it. So please.
For sure. No, so another election official in the chat noted that in their jurisdiction, poll workers serve a multi-election cycle term. So they are trained and then they're expected to come back time and again. And they're worried about, what it might look like to outsiders if they were to focus on demographics in their recruiting. Related, we have some comments, folks who have requirements to have a bipartisan mix of poll workers, but their jurisdiction leans heavily one way or the other. And I'm just curious, I'm seeing a lot of nods. So Anita, you looked most enthusiastic off the bat. Can you speak to addressing some of these challenges?
I think I just generally look enthusiastic. But yes, I mean, we work very closely with our election officials in St. Louis City and County, and that's certainly something we hear from them. And I have students who've signed up to be poll workers. So you have these young people who are interested, but they lean Democratic. And when you sign up in St. Louis City, you've had the same Democratic poll workers coming there year after year. And so sometimes they don't need Democrats. What they need are young Republicans. And, so there are challenges, I think, with both age and party in that recruitment that our election officials are facing. As far as recruiting demographically, I don't think you necessarily have to be, vocal about, we don't want maybe accusations of DEI or whatever floating out there. But I think you can be strategic in going after veterans, after faith groups that maybe are more diverse racially and ethnically, after college and high school students to get younger. So I think you can do some maybe targeted recruitment without being overtly, targeting particular demographics.
Anybody else have anything in response to that? Excellent. I see one in here that I like, which is any research or sense on how the amount of training affects interest or retention for election workers. Is the enhanced training working against retaining folks, or is it something that is getting folks to continue to come back? What does that look like? Is there anything that exists saying one way or the other? Well, does anybody want to make anything up?
I'm not aware of anything, so this is a good group to ask, though. But anecdotally, one of the big things that we've seen an issue with in Maryland, and especially with college students, is the timing of the training and the number of trainings become a deterrent. So there are real issues where people will think it's a good idea, but then think through what the requirements are on the front end and drop out for various reasons. And again, it's not to blame the local election officials, like they're juggling lots of other things, but that's just one of the things that's a reality with some of the groups, is just the match between the timing of the opportunities and the responsibilities.
I'll also add that, again, I don't know of any published research on this. Maybe that's a new avenue of research to go into, but just anecdotally, in terms of how people react to the training themselves, I've been in trainings where it's literally just someone lecturing at the poll workers for hours on end. And then I've been in trainings where they will bring in the voting machine and say, let's act out scenarios. And it's a much more engaging experience, and that the latter was much more positively received than the former. So making trainings interactive, it also made people feel, I think, more prepared in that, oh, I don't have to be as scared if this situation happens because I've already kind of run through this before in an artificial way. So the structure of the training can also matter. But again, that's anecdotal.
I have a more specific one here from an election official in Pennsylvania that I wanted to throw to the group, and I'll just read it. I'm thinking of putting recruitment posters in our jury selection room. I'm assuming at least some of the people that show up for jury duty are civic-minded, and I'd love to know the presenter's thoughts on this idea. Mike, I think this might be particularly for you, but for anybody who wants to respond.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think that should be a group, like they've already shown that they can show up on time for something that's required. So you've got a little bit of information about them from that. They are there often, board for a really long time. So giving them an opportunity to sign up and do something different, or think about how public service can be thought of in a more fun way than jury duty. Sorry if I'm revealing too much about my feelings about jury duty, but it's important, but it's not, the process has not, in my experience, been super exciting. So I would have been happy to think about filling out more information to learn more about being a poll worker. So I think that's a really good idea.
You can work with the clerks of the court to get it turned into a test by having jury duty start at 5 a.m. So then oh, they show up at 5 a.m. Morning people. Sorry.
No, that's good. I think that's the primary key test. That should be the only test, really, is can you get up at 5 a.m. That should be the only training required. Or maybe you should start the training at 5 a.m. to make sure. But no, I was just going to add that to your question. In the 2022 version of the poll worker survey that Anita and David did in 2024, I actually looked at the free response questions that people wrote to how did you become a poll worker, and one of the most frequent responses was I saw a flyer at a courthouse, a flyer at city hall, flyer at community centers, and just throwing this out there. One of the more common responses was my local election official had a booth at my employer's office. So they actually worked with local employers to recruit. So just another avenue potentially.
I would add that we have our local election officials come to like our spring and fall involvement fairs on campus. And so they both help us register voters, which we already have student orgs doing that, but they recruit poll workers there as well. I do think it's a challenge, though, when there's that link for people to express their interest in poll workers. I've had a number of students do that, and it's likely because maybe they're Democrats and St. Louis City doesn't need any more Democrats or something, but sometimes they get no response. And I think that is very discouraging to them. So I would encourage folks, whatever your system is for inquiries, just make sure that people are responding and being encouraging in some way.
That's excellent. Looking at Mike, we've got some questions about how do you reach veterans? What specific examples or types of recruitment have you seen, Mike, that have proven to be successful within jurisdiction?
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't looked at this in terms of testing messaging to get veterans specifically or other groups, but I became familiar with this through the Vet the Vote program, which We the Veterans and Military Families runs. And so, they have a pretty large community, they're expanding, and I think connecting with them is one of the great ways. I saw also in the Q&A someone suggested going to the Legion and going to the groups. I mean, I think there are really good opportunities to, I know election officials are doing all sorts of things out in the community. If you're not already going to those Legion posts or meetings, that's maybe one other way to really capture people and make a pitch.
We have another specific question. I think this one's more for Anita and David here. This is a jurisdiction that has both vote centers and precincts, as well as voting locations on tribal lands. And they're wondering if you've looked at all into recruiting and staffing those locations, often of which are well off the beaten path for a lot of other members of other communities, and wondering if you can speak to any of those challenges at all.
Unfortunately, not. We haven't looked at those situations. We've looked so far at places like St. Louis County, Fresno,
Yeah.
sort of standard, kind of major metro area. Yeah, so sorry.
Yeah, we haven't looked at that, but maybe a slightly relevant finding that I can speak to is we did do a study on ranked choice voting, which you probably don't like if you're an election official, in Alaska, and the information landscape. So how was the changes in the voting process communicated to Native populations in Alaska? And they had a lot of success in communicating that. And it was working with organizations who are, focused on Native success and, different things and communicating sometimes in like post offices, because rural communities, a post office is a gathering place where they get information. So flyers in post offices were effective. Also, finding if there are native languages, communicating in those. So maybe some of those could also translate into recruiting poll workers, some of those same strategies.
I see a question in here, and I don't know if anybody will have anything in response to it, but I think this person makes an excellent point, which is the payroll system for their county is, in their words, something that takes a very long time. Their data shows that they lose 3 to 5% of their folks each election cycle just because it takes so long for folks to get paid. I really love this point in that we talk about doing new things, doing things better, on and on and on. You have to do the basic things well. You've got to, if you're hiring people, you have to pay them, you have to train them. I really like the point that this person's making through their question, just that, you can get cute, but you also have to mind the shop back at home. Kyle, I know we've got 4 minutes left. Do you want to do one more before closing us out?
Sure thing. As soon as you asked, of course, I clicked away from the screen accidentally. But I mean, I think we were getting into some earlier, if I can take the last question here, because we were getting into a discussion earlier, just some interesting and cool ideas for various recruitment and retention techniques that you all have seen in jurisdictions that you've worked with, that you've worked in, that you've been a poll worker yourself, that you've talked to and studied in your research. And I'm just curious if there's anything you haven't gotten to name here, if there are any other ideas that stand out to you, whether that's a flyer you saw, a pipeline program, something else that others here can just take and mule over whether it works in their jurisdiction.
I think one thing I'd say, just sort of to follow up on a couple of these issues, that relationships are very important, particularly recruiting poll workers from newer groups, from students, young people, tribal lands. I think having a connection to champions within that community who will vouch for you, who will connect you with their community, um, who will encourage the people in that community, hey, being a poll worker is a good thing, serves the community. For students, I think it's important to know you won't get punished if you miss school for a day to do this, for example. So those things are important.
I agree. And also, one thing I've seen in St. Louis City, particularly in their efforts to recruit younger poll workers, is they'll let them split a shift. So, this 5 a.m. keeps coming up. Well, maybe your buddy is a morning person and you're not. But if they can do the first half of the shift, you do the second. And then it also, a colleague presented research at the ESRA conference showing that, like, knowing, particularly for college students, knowing that someone that is going to be there, another college student, increases the likelihood that you'll serve as a poll worker. So that's sort of a twofold approach that I've seen used.
Yeah, I'll just add on, and this kind of adds to David's point about trust. One of the things that I've consistently run across is election officials talking about how important their relationship with the local party chairs are, as well as the local precinct party chairs. It's very important, especially when fostering trust, but also by virtue of poll worker recruitment. Even if you're in an area where one party is dominant, there's usually, obviously not always, some sort of local organized minority party organization. So they can be, in some cases, crucial in recruiting poll workers. I mean, most of the literature suggests that most people don't become poll workers in service of their party. However, a lot of people are recruited by local party officials. And despite the, heated rhetoric and polarization we see at the national level, by and large, local partisans tend to get along, and they just want to provide good elections that people can feel comfortable in, and yeah, I think that's crucial to running elections at the local level.
Mike, I don't want to not give you the time if you want it, but I'm happy if you cede it. You yielding?
No, I
This
think
looks
I
like
think
yield.
the no, I think the only thing I would add, those are really great suggestions, is working with community groups and trying to get that sort of group buy-in, because then if a couple of people flake out, you're not in as big a bind trying to figure out what to do. And I've heard from election officials that have done this, that it takes time, but you eventually get to a point where you don't have to worry as much, because you find the groups that are really serious and that keep coming back. And I think that's a great strategy.
All right, we are at the end of our time. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you to our panelists for an excellent discussion. I encourage folks who joined us, if you have cool, innovative, exciting ways that are working in terms of recruiting election workers, let us know. I think we all agree on this panel that the best of our work is informed by your work. So we'd love to see that. As always, our inbox is open. If you have any questions, email us at support@electionsgroup.com, and we will see you next time. Thank you, everybody.